Hello, everybody. So I understand I brought the weather. It's really fantastic to be here, and I'm just so excited to be in Ireland. I have so many friends, mentors who are Irish, but I've never visited. Finally, I make it. I actually have family in Dublin. I am blown away by the presentations. I was just telling colleagues over coffee that, having this masterclass, learning and listening and realizing the absolute power of connectivity in the room, but also with the rest of the world. And with this presentation, I just want to really share, and Shirley, really thank you for bringing in this aspect of, our humanity, how we feel, when we feel sad, when we lose something. And if there's anything that is so beautiful and intimate, is the natural world. And yesterday, before I begin, I was actually in London. I came from Switzerland, stopped in London for a premiere of a feature documentary narrated by Benedict Cumberbatch called How to Live on Earth. It was revealing, but not surprising. And really listening into the conversations here, I can realize how nature has shifted and we're losing things, and the dynamics are shifting, and how this intergenerational conversation needs to happen around wetlands. So here we go. We are the oldest multilateral environmental agreement in the world. The oldest. So remember that the time Luke Hoffman, Peter Scott, and many others were communicating to set up this convention, they were writing letters. There was no internet. And maybe at some later stage there was fax. But frankly, it was a letter. Hey, have you seen that bird? What do you think of that wetland? And when the convention was born in Iran in 1971, it was a real milestone. And this was before UNEP. I used to work for the United Nations Environment Programme, before it was born. So to realize this vision, this real drive to make sure that these vital ecosystems are saved, we became a multilateral entity. And you can see in that timeline all these different multilateral agreements. But what people, every time I say to colleagues, we're going for a COP, and they're like, you mean the climate COP? No, but our convention also does have a COP, a conference of the parties. So how do we then raise this visibility? And so after spending nearly 20 years or so in other parts of my career, I decided to come back home, because I actually started my career as an intern at Ramsar. And I'm a wetland hydrologist and ecologist. You know all of this, and I'm not going to bore you with what wetlands are, but they're these very diverse ecosystems. And in many parts of the world, we see different ecosystems, be it a rice paddy in Bali, be it the mangroves of Indonesia, or let alone Mexico, mudfloods, glaciers. We have 2 Ramsar sites in Switzerland that are glaciers, and which are disappearing also at the same time. So this diversity of source to sea is really the lifeline of the hydrological cycle on the planet. And even when I'm speaking in the different spaces, I'm really highlighting that wetlands are foundational to the hydrological cycle on this planet. And of course, we've just been talking about the different peatlands, the different dynamics that happen here in Ireland, and we know this. The services they provide and what they do. I'm preaching to the choir here. The biodiversity, the climate regulation, the jobs, the livelihoods, the culture, all of this intertwined and centered around wetlands. This is your map. So where I sit, where Flora and I sit in the Secretariat, we have these dots on the map. And I tell everybody that what I'm excited always about is I follow the dot. I come to the site and I say, I want to see what it looks like. Because I've read your RSIS and I've seen the data, and I'm a bit of a geeky ecologist. I'm like, okay, so, oh my God, they have this species, wow. And in some places, with these dots, that information does not exist at all. It's not updated. We don't know what it is. We're missing information. Now, these wetlands of international importance are places where people live. Most wetlands are lived spaces. the very essence of wise use. And by the way, this is bubbling up to the surface now to discuss what exactly is wise use. And you really need to be a part of this interrogation. What does it actually truly and utterly mean? So these sites are all over the world. There are over 2,500 of them. Beautiful places, complex places, changing spaces, and the very lifeline of the planet. To be able to do all of that work, it requires a secretariat. So we have a secretariat of about 24 people. And I'll start from the top. The conference of the parties is you. The governments, the 172 governments that I report to, and bring you information of what's happening in the world. Now, they meet every 3 years, and last year in July, we met in Zimbabwe in Vic Falls, on the edge of the Musonda. I don't know how many people have seen that mighty waterfall. And the world met there. Great conversations, and I'll speak a little bit about it, and the consensus and all of that. Now, the decision-making body of that COP is the Standing Committee. And that Standing Committee met earlier on this year in May, 4th to the 8th of May, to now make decisions about all of the resolutions that came out of the COP. And there are two governing bodies within the convention: SEPA, your communication, education, public awareness. How are we raising the profile? And I was really glad to hear about this consultative process that you had in the community this week. Really fundamental and important for people to understand what can we contribute to this change. And then the science, the scientific and technical review panel. It's actually chaired by Hugh Robinson, who's from New Zealand, together with his counterpart from Sri Lanka. And then there is the secretariat. So we are there then to connect with you, to serve you, and to gather information from the ground up and vice versa, to let you know what's actually happening. Now, the COP. So we had the COP in Vic Falls, which was amazing. The second time it's happened in Africa, the last time it was in Uganda, and it was nearly 3,000 people that came, great conversations, but also in a very fragile ecosystem. The Victoria Falls, or the Musonda. Now, for a lot of people, you may not be aware that even though we had the COP at a time when the water was gushing, you hear the sound of the water before you see it. People did not realize that there's been the worst drought in this region in 43 years. Wetlands were drying out. Even the actual rock structure on that waterfall was bare. I come from Zambia across the border. And 2.5 years ago, when I flew to Zambia to see my now late father when he was unwell, I couldn't believe it. For nearly 20 hours, there would be no power, because the hydroelectric dam had dried and go way below 10% of capacity, the Kariba Dam, which is shared between Zambia and Zimbabwe. So you begin to see the implications of when wetlands shift and change, energy is affected, lives are affected, biodiversity changes, climate change, overabstraction, changes within an ecosystem. So here was the world meeting for the COP and the water, and for many, it was their first trip to Africa. They're like, wow, this is amazing. Yeah. It looks amazing momentarily, but it's a really changing dynamic, because the Zambezi is actually a shallow river. It's the mighty Zambezi, but it's a shallow river. What came out of this conversation? Prior to the COP, we released, this is the 3rd edition of the Global Wetland Outlook. And listening into the earlier conversation, I really enjoyed the conversation, all of them. I want to spotlight the issue on the peatlands, because I used to be the head of the UN RED and also the landscape program for UNEP. And the Global Peatlands Initiative was under my watch. And every time I had conversations with Diana Kapansky, who still manages it, I would be like, okay, what is happening in the world? Oh, we have to go to Scotland and to Ireland, Musonda, because there's over-obstruction, etc., and degradation, and I would see all those things in the map. Now, this report last year also spoke to the fact, what does it cost to lose a wetland? What is the cost? It's the first time we've done this economic valuation. The changes that are happening. You saw what happened in Blatten in Switzerland. A whole glacier came down and an 800-year-old village was gone in a matter of minutes. What happens with these changes in the cryosphere that are now changing the dynamics of our systems? And with this evaluation, there was an assessment of worth. What is the true worth of wetlands? And I think this is an underestimate. 39 trillion annually of the services they provide. And sometimes I ask the question, and my grandmother would always say, what is the price of air, of breathing? Can we put a value on that? It's very difficult, but obviously for bankers, for others, we have to quantify the natural capital that we're actually depending on. So then this particular report is very, very important, and I really would like to encourage you to have a look at it. What is the value? How can we restore? Who is financing wetlands? Because they also need to be financed. And part of that report, and working very closely with many partners, we're also working, and this is Anna Flor, she can speak a little bit about it, is the geo-wetlands. Last year in July, I requested the European Space Agency that we sign a memorandum of intent, an agreement. Because when I did my PhD, I looked at Landsat, using Landsat imagery. Now more than ever, with technology advancement, to really understand, particularly in very remote areas. Lake Titicaca, for instance, in Peru. Very high, it's our highest wetland site, very difficult to reach in the Andes. We don't know what the state of play is. And so to be able to combine this data, how do we actually use Earth observation as part of decision-making processes and support countries in relation to wetland inventories? So we are now working very closely with WMO. We also signed another agreement with the World Meteorological Organization that hosts GEO. We're working very closely with IPCC and many others to really bring all these scientific elements. And of course, we're living in very complicated times, funding complexities and everything. So we have to also think about efficiencies. How are we efficient as a secretariat in terms of our partnerships? Wetland city accreditation, this really, really does excite me. Because obviously the data has shown that we are going to be leaving, if not, most of the population right now is living in cities, urban spaces. And I was in London yesterday, and it was mid-30s. I remember being on the tube. I was like, okay, do I just jump on the bus or what? It was hot. It was blistering hot. And what is keeping wetlands cooler is the green infrastructure, the green and blue, water, and parks and forests. So we have the Wetland City Accreditation, and the Wetland City Accreditation has become really, really something that is getting conversation. It's really bubbling, and everybody's super, super interested. The most recent two cities I want to share is Valdivia and Entrele in Argentina. Valdivia is in Chile. Now, let me just share very quickly a quick story. So when I had a random visit at the Secretariat, and the ambassador of Chile reached out to me and said, Musonda, I've got Senator Oresti in my office and we're coming to Glon. I said, bienvenue, welcome. And Senator Oresti showed up and says, we want to really dedicate our city as a wetland city, the first in Latin America, and we've done a consultative process with the communities. We're really looking at all, and I was like, wow. Oh, okay. And he's a legislator, he's a senator. But what he said next, for me, actually made me realize sometimes how information is transferred within communities. He said it's been very difficult to convince other legislators that we need to have this as a wetland city, because their assumption is that the moment it becomes a wetland accredited city, we're taking land away from them. We can no longer develop it. And I was like, okay, this is super interesting. So how then do you get people to be on the same page, to understand why we're doing what we're doing? And the planners, because normally a city is actually under a mayor. So how do you get local government to be involved and investors? Kigali in Rwanda is one of our wetland accredited city. And because we had Kigali accredited in 2022, the World Bank has now invested resources, and KfW, the German bank, invested money in the restoration of Kigali. And when I met one of my friend's parents in Kigali, I said, I've been working on Nyandungu, the wetland system, etc., when I was in UNDP. And he said to me, it's wonderful to see this restoration in the city. Because, mind you, he was 95. He said, it's been 25 years since I saw that bird and that bird and that bird. Because the wetland in the city is alive. Nature comes back. Wetland Awards. This is also one another exciting award that we do and we champion within the convention. And during every COP, there's an award that was given. So 3 awardees that received awards at the last COP. These 3 young people, amazing humans. You've got, at the very end, Diana. Diana is from Bolivia, an indigenous woman, working with her aunties and mothers and community, etc. They've literally risked their lives to save Lake Ururu, which is a Ramsar site. Because there's lithium mining on one side, and there's all the obstruction on the other side. And we need to save this wetland. Tons of plastics in there. And you begin to see how these young people are challenging the status quo within very complex political dynamics. In the middle, you've got Iman from Iran. You know what's happening in Iran right now. Regardless of even those complexities, he's posting every other day online saying, oh, we're talking to people about these wetlands. Thank God the war hasn't touched us over here, but I'm trying to educate the community about why birds matter and why they're coming through these wetlands in Iran as part of the flyway, and why we need to know the numbers and the populations, etc. And then there's the lovely young lady, Laura, who's from the Panama City. Now, Panama is a country and a city at the same time. Now, next to the Panama Canal, on the other side, we have a Ramsar site. And she noticed all these plastics just going into the ocean. She was like, no, come on, something can be done here. Puts together a business thing and finds some resources, a little bit of money to design some innovative technology to stop the plastic from entering the sea and also the estuary area, etc. Fascinating, and created employment for young people in Panama City. So we get some resources from Danone to be able to give these young people 10,000 euros each. We also have realized that, look, it's important to have these synergies happening across the board. How do we deliver impact? Very recently, we actually contributed to the restoration. In fact, the day the restoration law went through in Brussels, Flo and I just arrived and we emerged out of the underground and there were cameras and I was like, what's going on? And then we entered the EU building, it's finally gone through, but what does it actually translate to? So I'm so glad to see here you're discussing your national restoration plan. I'm like, wow, that moment and this moment merging and converging together, this is really absolutely exciting. We have a joint work plan with the CBD. We work with, obviously, the Rio conventions. And just very quickly, I also want to mention that for the first time in the convention's history, we're at the table for the UN Water Conference. Now, I don't know how many are familiar with the UN Water Conference process. Okay. The United Nations had a UN Water Conference in 2023. The second conference in 47 years to talk about water. And everybody was like, what? 47 years? And I was there in New York. I was freaked out. And at that conference, I made a statement. I was like, oh, I hope this doesn't cost my job, but I'm just supporting my countries here. Wetlands are foundational to the hydrological cycle. And we cannot not talk about water without wetlands. So for the first time, even though it's a UN process, because we are not in the United Nations system, I used to be a UN diplomat. So I convinced, through conversations and dialogue and flow, having meetings with everybody, countries, you made it possible as governments that we are at the table as a convention, as the oldest multilateral in the UN process, water process. So we are called in all of these discussions and really have a seat at the table. And the UN Water Conference, the third UN Water Conference, will be taking place in Abu Dhabi in December, led by the UAE and Senegal. So you begin to see that there are these processes that we could have been absent from simply because, you're not the United Nations, and we know what's happening with the UN right now. So we are now at the table, and we're making sure that through these multilateral governance processes, we're also included and we're part of that. The UN Decade on Ecosystem Restoration, I was involved at the very outset and the beginning of that. We're also working very closely with other MEAs, be it climate, be it Minamata, be it BRS on chemicals, the flyways, and all of this work. We're trying to make sure that these synergies are really amplified within our convention. So stronger synergies obviously are very important. Climate, etc. It's been spoken about here, looking at the culture and identity, the economies, and making sure that investing in our wetlands is also investing in our futures. World Wetlands Day, it's my fav, because it takes me to places where I see the power of community. Absolute power of community. And with the theme this year, looking at wetlands, celebrating traditional knowledge, what you actually spoke about, cultural heritage, phenomenal, and I'll speak a little bit to that very shortly. Now, the SDGs, we're just coming up to the end of what could be the end. There's a big discussion right now in the UN post-2030. What does that actually mean? But there is a realization now more than ever that wetlands are quite central to all of the SDGs. Business, education, water, life below land, everything really does revolve. The justice issue, human rights issue, wetlands are very central to these different processes and these different SDGs. Now, I'm going to take you through some storytelling, through some different places that I visited, not many, but I'll just really give you a snapshot of some of these issues that you've been discussing this morning, but how they're also connected to the bigger picture. A week and a half ago, I was in Accra, Ghana. How many have been to Ghana? Yeah. So many years ago, I'd tell them, no, I'm vegetarian, and they'd make me kelewele, which is plantain. I'm like, guys, I cannot have plantain every day. And I'd hoping, I'd have something else. But beautiful country, historically known as the Gold Coast. Landed in Ghana, and I was landing, and I took this picture from the air, and I was like, what is going on? The color of gold. Galamsey, the illegal obstruction of gold mining. And gold is at the highest at the moment. Now, the challenges of Accra right now is that they're trying to figure out whether they can stop the tap water from being supplied. 3/4 of my friends, if you're an international job or you're fairly wealthy, a girlfriend of mine told me she only cooks with Volvic water. I was like, wow. The amount of mercury and arsenic, and name it, what is in there. This has come from upstream. This river was just about to enter the sea. And what I saw freaked me out. And of course, when I was invited to the table, they said, oh yeah, we have some very good fish in Ghana. I was like, I'm allergic. But something beautiful happened, and very much in line with the theme of our World Wetlands Day. We drive further in west, past Akuradi, and there's a river. It's the only one I've seen without the yellow color, the Amanzule. And I've been invited by these two royal houses, these two kings. You need to come because we've been having discussions and we want to designate this greater wetland site as a Ramsar site. I'm like, oh, okay. I have no background information, but they said, you have to come, and went there for World Ocean Day. Now, this is a peat system river. Its waters are dark, beautiful. There were swallows over our heads, just, playful and happy. I was like, whoa, the difference. I started to ask questions. So I met His Royal Highness Awolai Kwasi III. I say to him, what happened here? How? He said, my predecessor and my uncle, the previous king, made sure that we cannot have gold mining in our upper catchment or in the periphery of our wetland system. We know what that does, and we have systems in place on how to extract gold less invasive and really in a way that is not problematic for nature. And as I stood with him there, this wetland is massive. When I asked the government people from the EPA, they told me the initial assessment was 50,000 hectares. When they did all the groundwater assessment and everything, it's 200,000 hectares going into Côte d'Ivoire. So now they have to start discussing with Côte d'Ivoire on having a joint Ramsar site. It was phenomenal, where you see traditional knowledge systems managing a whole natural space. But what was even more interesting, I remember mentioning this to colleagues when I came back to Secretariat. I said, there's an IPBES report that said, about 3 years ago, I think it was the 2021 report, that said traditional and indigenous lands are degrading the least in the world. That tells you something. The IPBES report actually quoted that. Let me take you now to a beautiful part of the world. You remember Madonna's song, La Isla Bonita? You remember it, right? Tells your age. I flew to this beautiful cold island called San Pedro, the island of San Pedro that Madonna sings about. Beautiful. When you're landing on the island of San Pedro, they're atolls. I don't come from a coastal country, so I'm always fascinated by the sea and checking it out and trying to understand. And you see these atolls, and they're beautiful and they're amazing. And this pilot is telling me, Dr. Mumba, we even have the blue hole here. I was like, what? The blue what? In the sea? Okay. Yes, everybody comes diving. It's amazing. The next day, I go for a run along the beach, and I'm like, okay, somebody left their shoe. But it wasn't so much about someone leaving their shoe as that brown thing that you see there. As I'm going, I'm like, I'm allergic to eggs. The smell of rotten eggs. I was like, okay, I don't have a mask. Let me run back and I get back to the hotel and I'm like, what is that smell? Says, oh, did you see the brown stuff over there by the beach? I said, yes. That is sargassum. Now, sargassum is an invasive that is floating all over the Caribbean. And because of the ocean currents, sargassum has found its way on the coast of Ghana. This invasive is everywhere. But the invasion is not just there on its own. So is plastic. So you begin to see these complex problems in wetlands, and whatever is happening, you're like, whoa, okay, something is shifting and something has happened. And because the seas are warming, especially in the Caribbean, so the sargassum spreads. Huge problems. Then let me now take you to Mexico. We all like our guacamole. We want to eat some nice stuff. I arrive in Mexico City in 2023, February. And now if you've been to Mexico City, there's a part of Mexico City where there's the highest flagpole, I think, in the world, I heard. Huge flag, massive. And as the flag is flying, I asked my host, I said, what is on your flag? They were like, oh, Dr. Mumba, the story of what's on our flag is the story of Mexico, how we became Mexico. And we're taking you to a wetland about the story of the flag. So they start to unpack now. There's a story of the Aztecs or the Mexicana, wherever they were migrating from, maybe Canada, I don't know. They were moving. There's a folklore that says, go thee forth and find the land, but where you see the eagle and the snake in the sky, you shall settle. And there the water will come. And so the Aztecs move. And of course, they find the water, and they find the eagle and the snake in the sky, because it's migratory period, right? The eagle has found food. And then you find all the agave. Fascinating. So I arrive at this wetland, and I meet these young women and men, the Mexicana, or the Aztecs as they're known traditionally. Now, Mexico is named after the indigenous peoples called Mexicana. And these young people did something that was phenomenal within their community. The previous president, not the current president of Mexico, had a plan because, Mexico is receiving too many guests, etc. We need to expand the airport. Now, the expansion of the airport was into this seemingly dry lake system next door. And these young people went to see the president with the Mexican flag. Texcoco. This land is our land. Mind you, the government had already started the works. You cannot build an airport on this wetland. This place comes alive. Our ancestors always told us. And just as the runways were being put in, freak rain. You can see the runways. Freak rain. Flooded everywhere. Now this is on the edge of Mexico City. And you know, Mexico City is over 25 million people. Amazing landscape that is seemingly dry and like what was shared here, this groundwater recharge, you see it, you don't see it, you see it, you don't see it, and here it showed up. Now, but here's something that also happens that's very interesting. So Texcoco is a Ramsar site. Now, the city of Mexico, with the pressure of sewage, they pass their sewage through Texcoco so that the wetland can clean it. It's 25 million plus people. So the wetland does what it does. It cleans a little bit, but it's stressed. On the other end of Texcoco is a massive pipe. The water, when it's just sort of clean, an interbasin water transfer happens to Hidalgo. Because Hidalgo, even though it is water stressed, that's where the corn grows, that's where the avocado grows. And Hidalgo, if you Google, they used to have tons of problems with cholera. Because the wetland hasn't quite done its job, it's overstressed. So you begin to see even these connections between wetland and health in one system. So there's been a lot of discussions, and they had a massive drought, by the way, and only Texcoco had water. So it's very fascinating. You begin to see these decision-making dynamics to save or not to save. Now, when you go across Mexico City, it's Rio Hidalgo, Rio Fernando, Rio. And I was like, where's the river? And then they said, no, we built over it, all over it. And then you look at the buildings, they're all bending because Mexico City is sinking. And I'm like, wow, we built over the rivers and it's sinking. Okay, this is new to me. So you begin to see how the changes in the nature, in the environment, in the wetland has another wicked problem. So now they have to think about what they're going to do because Mexico City is dense. I want to share very quickly just a personal story to just say, you're inspired sometimes by people that come into your life, that are in your life and as a family. And I was born in northern Zambia in a place called Mansa, on the border with Congo DRC, to a South African mother and Zambian father. So I grew up around wetlands, and you can see all these lake systems, beautiful place. And all the marshes and all the different massive peat systems that I didn't even know were peat, but really beautiful ecosystems. And I told my father once that I wanted to become a medical doctor. And then he says, are you sure? You're always swimming in the river. I was like, yeah, I need to be a doctor with a stethoscope over my, because it's a prestige thing, right? And then eventually I became a wetland ecologist. And so I left Zambia in 1998 to come to the convention as an intern for Africa. Then spent some time with WWF, learned so much, did my PhD at UCL in wetland hydrology, in a wetland site, in a Ramsar site in Zambia to understand all these issues, then worked for WWF UK briefly, and also in the region, and then joined the United Nations because I needed to understand what is all this diplomacy, what is, these UN people, what exactly do they discuss? Confused me for a while, and then after a while I said, no, it's time to go back home to what I love. So 2022, when the opportunity served itself, I was back at the convention. And one of the individuals who really supported me was that gentleman. He died last year, Professor Harry Chibwela. When I was at University of Zambia, he was like, Musonda, you understand wetlands so well, you need to study them. And he took me to that wetland as a 19-year-old to go and see it, the Kafue Flats, which is a massive wetland system, a floodplain system, where I went back. But also because my father would take us on holiday to the Vic Falls. I saw the Victoria Falls as a 13-year-old, and I was like, what is this thing? Like, where's the water coming from? And my dad, because my twin sister and I are his oldest, we were like, girls, you are the best. You're the best of the best. And I was like, oh, this dude is cool. So we can become whatever we may want. Oh, yes, 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 yes. So my twin sister has a PhD in health communication, is a professor in the US, and I have a PhD in wetland ecology. So it's always so bizarre when we go to some family meetings and I'm like, oh, Dr. Mumba and Dr. Mumba, what's going on here? And we have a laugh about it. But really the inspiration was from my father. Because the thing that he always said to us was get an education and it will serve you well. You know, you can get married or you can whatever, you can have children, but get an education first. That's important. And talking of education, at the last in-person Big COP, I was asked to moderate a session with Antonio Guterres. But before the moderation, I was also asked to do a panel with 2 women. And I'm asking my colleagues, what's 2 women? And I see this imposing woman walking towards me. Hello, you must be Musonda. I was like, this is I. And you are? I'm Mary Robinson. I was like, the Mary Robinson? And we have a laugh because I just do not remember seeing a picture of her, and I knew she was president of Ireland, etc., but I didn't realize she was even that tall. So we're having, and where are you from, ma'am? And I was like, I'm Zambian. Oh, I have stories about Zambia. They wanted to give me and my husband, you know, a goat, and I'm like, what, are you from Luapula? Oh yeah, you guys are too generous. A goat, and you're just like the Irish. And then I say to her, I hope I visit Ireland one day. You must. You really must. And we had such a wonderful chat just before we went on stage. But also what she said about justice, women, water, people, nature, climate. And I was listening to her and I was like, how do you do it? That you get up every day and really, even in the midst of all of this confusion in the world, you still go out there and just keep going. Says, oh, you have to keep going. Otherwise, there's just no other way. And I looked at her and I said, I need to go to Ireland. I mean, it's taken quite a long time because I met her in 2019. But I'm so grateful to be here. I'm really, really grateful. And I just want to close with a picture of Kigali City, which is right there in Nyandungu, that wetland that has been saved because without this wetland system, even the gorillas downstream on Musanze cannot have clean water. So you begin to see our connections. We are all interconnected. So thank you, and I hope to have some exciting conversations.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Dr. Mumba. I mean, we in Ireland tend to think of ourselves as brilliant communicators. I'm afraid we pale by comparison to you. I looked down at the room and all of these smiling faces. When I stand up and speak, people cry. So you're excellent, well done. And thank you so much for giving that international perspective as well. We are one signatory to the convention. There are many others, 171 others. When you look at the map of the world and you see Ireland, it's just one dot. And maybe that's not a bad thing because we have so much wetland in Ireland. But could I ask you, it's a difficult question before we open it to the floor.
Right.
Or maybe it's not difficult at all, but your focus is wetlands.
Yeah.
It's an ecosystem that is really important, but there are other ecosystems as well. Mm-hmm. How do you deal with landscape level restoration that includes wetlands but is not limited to it? Mm-hmm. How do you build a bridge from that ecosystem to others in your mind? Is there something to be done there that we need to join those dots?
Absolutely. And that's why I was talking about this connection of source to sea. So when I came back, and I keep telling governments and people and partners that I'm an ecologist. And as an ecologist, I think holistically. I cannot separate the wetland from the forest. I cannot separate the fern from the sea. And I mean, these systems are interacting. So unfortunately, what we've seen, and I'm saying unfortunately, is dependent on who's sharing the information. You know, there are different scholars, like, I mean, very, very, very strict, you know, wetland experts, etc. And they're like, yeah, you know, we're not going to talk about the forest. Talk about the cuvette in the Congo. The reason the cuvette was discovered by colleagues of mine, actually from UCL, was what they saw above all of it was just the trees. in the Congo Basin, but it's a massive flooded peat system. So how do we look at the combinations? I'll give you one quick example. Very recently, in fact, yesterday I had such a serendipitous meet. So we go into this film premiere. I sit next to this woman. It's like, hey, how are you? Ching ching. Yeah, we do ching ching with our little champagne glasses. And she says, where are you from? And I said, I'm the Secretary General of the Convention on Wetlands. Ramza! I was like, yes. Are you familiar with that? She said, yes, we just gave you money. I said, me in particular? No. The government of Angola to designate Lycée Maliamono. I said, sorry, and you are? I'm Libby Lee, and I work for De Beers. De Beers, the diamond company. I was like, yes, we funded the National Geographic explorer, Steve Boers, to work on the Lycée Maliamono. Now, Lycée Maliamono, when you look above it, it's a massive forest system with all these springs. The Okavango River is born in Lycée Maliamono. The Zambezi River is born in Lycée Maliamono. So you begin to see these connections of the bigger system. And without the interactions, and I think for me it is the interactions that we need to talk about. And I think, I can't remember who said, look, just the water missing, because it's been over-abstracted, it makes the ecosystem very unsuitable. I think it was Owen. It makes the ecosystem very unsuitable, and then you have these flooding moments that are at the wrong time, etc. It's connected to a system. So the thing that we're also doing as a convention, and perhaps Flo will speak to that as well, in the National Wetland Inventory, when you're doing an inventory, the bird cannot choose, I'm going to put my foot in the sea over here, and then I'm going to put my foot over here. And it's navigating this beautiful and yet complex ecosystem. So we need to remind, especially site managers, that this is what the ecosystem looks like. And this is also the reason why, and one of the things I must tell you, Flo, you have to be honest, did Ireland submit their National Wetland Report? Yes. Brilliant. Your National Wetland Report for the COP is absolutely critical. Now, let me tell you what that report does. All the national wetland reports that are submitted to us at the Secretariat, that's the data that the CBD uses. That's the data that UNCCD uses. That's the data that UNFCCC uses. We are the best reporting convention. Bravo to you. You need to give yourself an applause. Really, I'm serious. The NBSAPs are being updated with information from us. We are the best reporting convention. So you begin to see the synergistic relevance and importance. I hope I've answered your question.
That's an A answer. Not a B, an A plus. So we'll open it to the floor. Before you speak, if you're to speak, can you introduce yourself just so Dr. Mumba understands where you're coming from? So questions open to you, please. Any questions from the floor? Come on, guys. Okay, at the back, Sean. Just wait till the mic comes, Sean.
Thank you very much. That was a wonderful talk. Sorry, I'm Sean Kelly, National Parks and Wildlife Service ornithologist. You mentioned after my presentation earlier about a kind of side meeting, I think, at one conference and meeting with representatives of the World Bank or global banks. And I'm just curious to hear your perspective on how the funding, say, or the focus of investing financially in wetlands is changing globally, and what it looks like in the near future.
So what it looks like in the near future? Okay, so let me perhaps begin from the beginning. So you saw the picture of the gold, right? In the river. One of the challenges we've had, and thank you because you spoke about flyways. One of the most complex issues that we're having right now, Minamata Convention. Minamata Convention, you know the Minamata Convention on mercury, right? Minamata Convention, for a long time they were wondering, how is mercury in the Arctic? Birds. So a bird has flown all the way from Ireland or from wherever, gone south, and had water from that river that you saw, and then flies back, migrates back. Now, because of this migratory pathway, one of the conversations that we have an initiative with the East Asia Australasian Flyway, with the Asia Development Bank, called the Regional Flyway Initiative. Check it out. It's also a case study in the Global Wetland Outlook. Why did the ADB invest in this regional initiative flyway? Because there's Hong Kong, there's Shenzhen, there's Shanghai, and all of these cities I'm mentioning are megacities. Massive cities. So the birds leave Siberia. They come across a highly populous region. Multilateral development banks are the ones that put in money, give money to a country to do infrastructure. The decisions they're making sometimes is not informed on the nature dynamics. What is happening here? What does the map say? So because of this initiative, ADB, before a decision is made, the money that they give to China, and China is a very interesting and good case study. They said, no road goes here. If the road goes on through this wetland, this is how the drying will happen. But also, this is the largest breeding area for spoonbills. Oh, okay, that's in the flyway. So the loans and the grants that are being made have to be reviewed. So for the first time in Multilateral Development Bank, and the people that did the convincing was BirdLife International. We have 6 international organization partners that we work with as the convention. BirdLife, Wetlands International, WWT, IUCN, who are our host in Switzerland, WWF, IMI, the International Water Management Institute. Who else did I forget? That's it. So these are our international organization partners. So BirdLife went and sat on the table with people that dispersed the money. Now this initiative, because it's been so successful, the World Bank, we want in on birds and banks. So the World Bank is now going to be funding the Iowa side of things, because Africa Development Bank just goes in flat out, okay, we need a road, okay, which country needs a road, a bridge, yeah, let's clear off this land, etc. But nobody has mapped and I'm hoping that you're going to be involved in the Global Flyway Summit that's happening in Nairobi. Big discussion, September 8th to the 10th, I think. So it's important to also be involved. So back to your question, why are banks interested? We've seen the same thing with CAF, Latin American Bank, the World Bank, Africa Development Bank, Asia Development Bank. The natural asset, the damage that happens, the one example that I saw, in the Philippines, it was the indigenous peoples that spoke to the government that you don't touch this land. Yeah, we may need some roads here and there, but we can take the boat over there and use the boat. This is the Philippines is the middle section of the East Asia Australasian Flyway. So you can imagine the decisions that are made on the infrastructure that's done. So we begin to see that this bridging and this conversation, the next layer conversation, and this is one of my pet peeves, because I say, yeah, good, yeah, you can fund the Philippines, you can fund, but the community is recording this information every day. They're witnessing the change before their eyes. Barteld Godwit that left Alaska to go to Tasmania. And I have a funny story about it, because Jennifer George told me this story herself, the CEO of East Asia Australasian Flyway. There's a ceremony in Anchorage that the indigenous peoples do before the Bartelds leave. A whole beautiful ceremony to send them away. And then there's a community, the Maori on Tasmania, that have a receiving ceremony. Now, she facilitated these two communities on these two ends of the world to meet. So the women from Alaska and a man from Tasmania ended up getting married. So now I don't know who's monitoring the Barteld God, but it was one, I was like, oh my goodness, these two extreme cultures. But you begin to see that communities also need to be funded on how they do the monitoring, because you just can't be funding at the national level or these big higher level funding mechanisms.
Thank you. A very comprehensive answer.
Yeah, that's really positive and encouraging to hear that. Thank you very much.
Okay, any further questions from the floor? Yes, Rory over there. So maybe just wait for a mic to make its way over, Rory.
Thanks very much, Andy. Dr. Mumba, your presentation was absolutely fantastic. Fair play to you. I was delighted you talked about World Wetlands Day. And the reason being is here in Ireland we have a lot of days and indeed a lot of weeks. What's uniquely special about World Wetlands Day is that it's an international celebration. And when we talk about World Wetlands Day, now it does fall on 2nd of February, so it's not great for outdoor events in Ireland, but still it's celebrated. But I was promoting a World Wetlands Day, I think in Clare one year, on radio, on local radio, and the guy said to me, "Don't we have a day for every day of the year now at this stage? What's special about World Wetlands Day?" And I suppose the question I wanted to ask is, how can we sort of raise awareness about World Wetlands Day, the importance of wetlands, not just on World Wetlands Day, but always. Like, it seems to be celebrated way more in other countries than it is in Ireland.
Okay, so that's an important question. So very quickly, here's my experience of the World Wetlands Day, and depending on the part of the world, global north, global south, I know that in the global north, 2nd of February is sometimes at the height of winter. Same in Korea. So the Koreans have done an interesting thing, because 2nd of February is your World Wetlands Day is not just, and this is the message I keep sending to countries and communities, it is not just the day, it is the day for the year. The theme is for until the next World Wetlands Day, but frankly, it's just, to ease and have a topic, etc. But that topic is for the year, and you can talk about everything. So in Korea, they celebrate it in May. And they invited me to go and do a pitch for I don't know this, but the batting. I was like, okay. And Kia, the car company, funds it heavily to celebrate that day in May. Now, what's also very interesting is, for me, I keep telling everybody that every day is World Wetlands Day. You wake up every day without even having a thought. You walk into that shower, you brush your teeth, you just open the tap, you drink your water. You're like, we just live very relaxed because everything is happening until the wetland has vanished. Then you don't know, until you cannot drink the water from that wetland. So for me, every day is Wetlands Day. Now, World Wetlands Day, if you're not aware, is a UN General Assembly allocated day. That means even countries that are not contracting parties to the convention celebrate World Wetlands Day because there's a General Assembly resolution on World Wetlands Day. Singapore, Qatar, these are countries, Ethiopia, they're not in the convention, but the stories they send us, phenomenal. And we run, and one of the things that I have done since I arrived at the Secretariat is also to amplify the communication. Because for me, the story has to be continuous, over and over and over, so that people are reminded. And we're working with different partners everywhere I go. The story of Ghana, we're doing a story of Ghana to just really demonstrate that even though we're way into the year, it is traditional knowledge systems that are saving that Amanzule. Traditional. Wetlands and culture. Heritage. So for me is let the story continue, because a lot of times, yes, we'll do the radio interview on the 2nd of February. Connect the wetlands to the Drylands Day. Connect the wetlands to Health Day. Connect, because it is interconnected. Every time I'm asked, okay, what do you think about wetlands and food systems? Agriculture is the largest driver of wetland loss. But at the same time, agriculture depends on wetland ecosystems. So let's talk about the connections and the pieces continuously, over and over again. And we were speaking, Rory, on the sidelines, and I was just mentioning to him that all the different places I'm visiting in the world, something is very evident to me, because I remember the 80s, 90s, environmental education was so high on the agenda. Right now, it is so underinvested. So underinvested that kids are confused. Like, what do you mean the water, the water's coming out of the tap? No, it's coming from somewhere, from nature. So there's a disconnect. So why are we not reinvesting? And I'm talking a lot about it in public fora, that we need to reinvest in education, because that is fundamental. We've done a lot of investment in restoration, big projects on conversation, girl child, boy child, I don't know what, But education is fundamental, and intergenerational education. It matters. It matters.
Thank you, Rory. Good question. And I suppose it's ultimately not good enough to know what needs to be done if you hold that to yourself. It's, as you say, it's about making the connections and the reconnections and bringing the theme of wetlands to the fore, not just for that day, but for the year, for the decade, effectively for the century. So absolutely. Further questions, please, from the floor? Shirley. It's coming, I think, yeah.
It's kind of...
Hi, Eva.
Thanks, Eva. No, you mentioned earlier on, I think we all mentioned it, about what the wise use of wetlands means, and I just wanted to ask you, actually, what in your sense, what is wise use of wetlands? How would you describe that?
Okay, so when the term wise use was coined, it was in 1971, and the framing that is even still in our articles. For me, as an ecologist, I thought it was a very revealing and revolutionary moment to actually define to use wisely. And depending on how it's translated, French, English, Spanish, or even Irish, how wise is wise? Exactly. What's wisdom? Because in using the turf, there was an arrangement of we're going to rotate so that the system may recover. There was some rotational systems that was wise by then. So for me is, what are these parameters, indicators, knowledge systems that are really dealing to the use and not overuse of these spaces? It is a big discussion right now. It is in the scientific and technical review panel. Somebody sent me an email last week. I have not read it. It's a 10-page email. The man was very emotional. I read the first 2 paragraphs. I was like, okay, I need to have time, to read this document. I am writing to you to understand, conservation and wise use and why here is the Nature article that I did and da-da-da-da-da-da. People are now interrogating, what do we mean by wise? And for me, it also has to come back again to the process of the convention. The scientific and technical review panel has to reflect on guidance that will be given to what site managers, to people, to thinking, is it sustainable development? Sustainable development was very, sustainable development, depending on who's actually defining what sustainable development. We are way, 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 way out of track with the SDGs, right? So what does that actually mean? Is it really similar correlation to sustainable development? So what I can say for me is, what is the wisdom that's been used in these nuances? And that's why a lot of the stories that we've gathered for this particular World Wetlands Day on culture, etc. And culture really, it's a moving target. What mattered that time in terms of policy, etc.? It mattered when the population was smaller, when there was no issue of land tenure, when there were different policy dynamics. Now here we are dealing with very complex political dynamics and also businesses that are interested, conflicting in the same space. So is that wisely used? So these are some of the conversations that we're battling with and struggling, and the scientific and technical review panel is actually reviewing that for the 5th strategic plan, which is now, by the way, it was cleared at the COP. Woo-hoo. So we're now unpacking all the indicators and everything, the indicator framework, to really also understand what that means exactly. I hope that helps.
Thank you, Shirley. We have one final question then from Aileen, if that's okay. Just wait, Aileen, for the mic to come, and maybe just introduce yourself as well, if you wouldn't mind, please.
Hi, Aileen O'Sullivan. I'm with Quilta, the State Forestry Company. I've a very simple question for you. I'm just wondering what happened to the airport outside Mexico City.
Oh, outside Mexico City?
Yeah, the one
it
that
was never
flooded.
built.
It was never built.
They designated that as a Ramsar site.
Ah, and
So it's now a Ramsar site that has all these runways there. They're still there. The birds still come.
They used the runways.
I beg your pardon?
They used the runways to
No, because so the runway was actually, it wasn't even tarmacked. They had just done it with the rubble, and then when it flooded, it just goes over the rubble. And it's just a flooded wetland. It's a massive wetland. So it's there. And so they saved it. And the president made a statement and said, these young people have humbled me because they have reminded me of our roots as Mexicans. The flag signifies that we take care of nature and I cannot have this wetland extended or this airport extended in what was ancient Aztec wetland system. And their wisdom is what's humbled. They killed the deal. I leave you on an interesting note. I'm sure you've seen what's happening in Albania. Wetlands, the big contention. So people are changing the dynamic, the narrative, because they see the value and the importance. I mean, in Albania they had all the little placard with a flamingo. Leave our flamingos alone. I was like, wow.
Thank you. I have two important jobs to do before I let you go for lunch. The first is, most important, it's to thank Dr. Mumba for her time, her energy and her commitment.